Lesson 9, Targeting, Alignment, and Call Plan. This is probably one of the most important lessons, I believe, because if a pharmaceutical sales organization, if a pharmaceutical company targets their customers properly, aligns their field forces toward those customers, it's you can save a lot of money and you can really maximize your profits. So targeting is the method that pharma companies use to identify the HCPs, healthcare providers, that are going to generate the most revenue. Sales associates cannot call on every HCP, so a subset needs to be created, and you create that subset using data analysis. So you may be a sales associate that is in a large metropolitan area, and even though there's multiple associates covering that area, like Manhattan, for example, or Queens, whatever, you need to subset the number of doctors there, because not all of those doctors are good customers. They may have patients, but they may not write your specific kind of product. They may have a limited number of patients. So there's a whole bunch of variables that go into how you target. Alignment is the method that pharma companies use to create sales territories. These territories must be created in an efficient and logical manner so you can contact all of your targeted healthcare providers at the lowest cost possible. So this is your cost-benefit analysis. It makes no sense to have a sales rep cover 500 square miles because they spend the majority of their day driving around. That's why you have to break things up. Now, there are exceptions to this rule. Some places in the Midwest, for example, where the population is much lower, you may have to do something strange like that, where you have one rep cover a large area. But you want to have small territories with a fixed number of HCPs that are targets to call on, so that they can be easily targeted and called on by associates. A call plan is based on the products that are in the sales associate's bag. The call plan dictates how often to promote a specific product to a specific HCP. And we talked about before in the previous chapter, what's in your bag. This is basically what it is. What's in your bag is what brands, what products, as a sales associate, are you promoting? Targeting and alignment. So you have to ask yourself these questions before you begin the whole process as a pharma company, and you use all kinds of sales data, pharma sales data, to make these the decisions as you go. So what are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to grow your brand? You want to maintain a brand? Or is it a launch product? Are you launching a new product and you want to gain inroads right away? What is the duration of your plan? Most targeting plans are about a quarter or a trimester long. The reason is because once you create your plan, it's frozen, quote, frozen for a given period of time. And then after that time, you want to retarget because HCPs may move in and move out of the area. Some HCPs that you thought were going to be, high quality customers turn out not to be. So it's normally a quarter to a trimester how long your targeting plan is. Who are your potential customers? This is based upon the geography that you're trying to cover for all your territories and also your specialties. We talked about this previously, but if you have a product, a brand that's approved by the FDA for use in females age 65 and older, you're not going to target pediatricians with your product. Customers versus patients. We talked about this before as well. A customer is your HCP, your healthcare provider, and then the patient is the consumer of your product. But as for targeting alignment purposes, customers are who you are targeting, HCPs. Direct-to-consumer marketing. We've all seen the ads on television where a pharma company uses marketing on TV and commercials and on radio ads, web advertising, to try to get the consumer to go talk to the customer, the HCP, their doctor, about a product. But again, you don't target patients, you don't target consumers of your product, you target healthcare providers. What is your desired customer reach and frequency? We talked about this in our call lesson about reach and frequency, and we're going to go over it again shortly. How many calls per day do you expect from your sales associates? Very important question. I mean, do you really want them to make 8 to 10 calls a day? That's very, very difficult for a rep to call on that many HCPs and give a good message, because you want to spend time with the doctor if you have the time, if the doctor gives you the time, and you want to make sure your message is clear and loud. And 8 to 10 rep calls a day may be too many, but 3 to 4 calls a day may be too few. So you have to balance that out by looking at the data. Promotion of a mass market product or specialty product. We talked about this as well previously. Mass market versus specialty, what the differences are. Mass market is an affliction that impacts a lot of people. Specialty is something that's more acute or more serious, and that's a different product, and it's a different way you target too. And a business unit target versus a sales associate added target. So the targeting and alignment group will push down targets to the sales associate when the target window is open. They open up a target window, you say, here's your customers. The sales associate then has the opportunity to go in there and make modifications. Now, many times there's limited modifications the sales associate can make, but the sales associate is, quote, on the ground and they know their customer base. But you want to make sure that you're spending all this time and effort on the business units using sales data to come up with the best target list. You want to make sure that the sales associate adheres to that mostly, and they can add a few high writers that may not be on the business unit target list. But it's very rare, because if you have a high writer, both the sales associate and the BU are going to agree on who that high writer is. So this doesn't happen that often, but it can. Will you be aligning territories by zip codes, metropolitan statistical areas, or some other methods? There's different ways to align a territory and draw boundaries. Will your area and district managers also be selling? Some companies have their DMs sell as well as sales associates. So now you have either double coverage, or you can spread out your individuals calling on HCPs to get more bang for your buck. Will you have more than one sales force presenting to the same customer? Oftentimes you will have multiple sales associates calling on the same HCP, promoting different products. That can happen with a very, very large pharma company. In a cost savings measure, though, you normally have just one rep calling on the HCP, but it depends upon the HCP specialty type and whether it's a mass market rep or a specialty rep calling on the doctor. So there's a lot to be taken into consideration there. What's your call plan? What's in your sales associate's bag? You also have to think about how you're going to do your call plan to be cost effective and also be effective, so that the sales associate is able to actually achieve what you want him or her to achieve. How do your targeting and alignment and IT teams generate target lists? So again, that goes to the algorithm you're going to use to generate your target list, and we're going to get it all to that later on in this chapter. Frozen target window, incentives considerations. So normally what happens is a frozen target window is open. It becomes a targeting window at the beginning of a semester or trimester. And then once everything is completed and everybody agrees on who the targets are for that specific territory, the targeting window is closed or frozen. At that time, those targeted doctors are the ones that the sales associate is incentivized on. Now, this can change from company to company, but usually as soon as that window is frozen, that's your incentive period. You can't have a fluctuating incentive base of customers, because that just confuses the associate and doesn't make the payouts fair. And we're going to have an entire lesson on incentives later on. Also, some other targeting and alignment considerations are the approved indications and off-label marketing. We talked about that as well. And oftentimes, a company will go through a case study or a proof of concept where they'll put out 8 or 10 sales associates that are going to speak on a launch product or some other kind of product. And then based upon what happens, they will build out their whole targeting and alignment system based upon that proof of concept. How targeting is done. So you have to do a lot of things in order to target. The first thing you're going to do is look at your reach frequency and calls per day, the individual numbers or targets you want to hit for all those. You have to decide whether you're going to do a zip code to territory or an MSA to territory alignment. You also want to have a count of your healthcare providers per the alignment, so that one sales territory doesn't have too many customers and the other one too little. That will get into whether you have contiguous or non-contiguous territories. Basically, your territories don't have to connect geographically on a map. They can be separated out if that's the best thing to do for your alignment. Then you have to go through your customer segmentation, your tiers, deciles, early adopters, super targets. These are all segmentation details we're going to get into shortly. We talked about the open target window and what the targeting window is. And then, of course, once the targeting window is closed, you have your frozen target list, your frozen customer list for that specific time period. We're just going to review call metrics real quick again because it's very, very important to understand how call metrics play a major role in your targeting and alignment process. So we discussed this before. Your calls, as you can see here, you have your total calls based upon your customers is 34 total calls based upon these 10 customers. You had 44 details. You detailed 44 products on these 34 calls. You detailed 34 products in the P1 position, 7 in the P2, and 3 in the P3. So again, as we discussed previously, your calls, associate made 34 calls to 10 targeted HCPs. They detailed 44 products. Their average details per call is 44 details divided by 34 calls for a 1.29 average calls per day. The reach is 80% because they called on 8 distinct HCPs out of a total of 10. Their frequency to the reached HCPs is 34 calls divided by 8 distinct HCPs, or 4.25 as a frequency. And their frequency to the targeted HCPs is 34 calls divided by 10 distinct HCPs for a 3.4 frequency. And weighted details is listed here, but it's not as important in targeting and alignment as it was in the call lesson, so we won't go over that again right now. Call metrics. Calls per day is the number of healthcare providers called on divided by the sales associates' days in the field. Mass market reps, again, we think around 5 to 8 calls per day is normally what they go for. Specialty is 3 to 5 calls per day. Calls per day equals total calls divided by days in the field. So if an associate works 4 days and they make 35 calls, their calls per day is 8.75. Days in field. A day in the field is any day that an associate works making presentations to healthcare providers. Training, seminar days are not days in the field. They're work days, but not days in the field. Days in field goals differ from company to company, but as a standard, you want your associates in the field calling on customers at least 80% of the time. Pharma reps have to undergo a lot of training, and that is why the industry standard is not higher because of the highly regulated industry that this is. Reps undergo a lot of training. Once an associate makes a call, that day counts as a day in the field. And we talked about the caveats before. Sometimes an associate may make a call on the weekend that gets pushed to the weekday. Sometimes an associate may make a call on a half day after the training, and that call would get pushed also. Now, the actual call in their customer relationship management system is going to show the actual day, but you may not count that as a day in the field because you don't want to adversely affect your call metrics for your associate. Details per call is the number of different products an associate talks about during their presentation, what's in their bag, what products are in their bag. Calls are broken up by priority, P1 primary, P2 secondary, etc. Detailed priorities vary from HCP to HCP, so you could have 2 healthcare providers and they each have a different P1 product in their call plan. It is more cost effective to have a single associate detail multiple products than to have multiple associates visit the same HCP to promote different products. That is true, but as we said before, sometimes if you're promoting both a mass market and a specialty brand product to an HCP, you may want to have different reps call on that doctor. Pharma companies do not want to dilute the message by having so many associates call on the HCPs, because you have to realize that other pharma companies are also sending their associates to call on the same HCP. Frequency. Frequency is the number of times your targeted healthcare providers have been called on during a given period. Goals will vary from company to company, but you usually expect your associates to make between 2 and 4 calls to their customers during the given time period, which is your targeting time period, a semester, trimester, whatever it is, a quarter. As an example, an associate has 100 targeted HCPs, and the associate calls on 82 of those HCPs. They made 2 calls to 50 of them. They made 3 calls to 32 of them. So the frequency is calculated as the total number of calls made total number, divided by the distinct HCPs, and you get your frequency here of 2.39. Reach. Reach is the number of healthcare providers called on during a given period of time, divided by the total number of targeted HCPs. So reach is a percentage goal from company to company. It varies, but you want to reach about 80% of your customers. So in this example, an associate has 100 targeted HCPs. The associate called on 82 of those targeted HCPs. It doesn't matter how many times they called on them, that's frequency. Just that they called on them at least once. So the associate called on 82 of their targeted HCPs at least one time during the trimester. Therefore, the reach is 82 targets called on divided by 100 targets equals 82% reach. Time off territory. Time off territory is calculated as the time a sales associate is not in the field calling on healthcare providers. These days include vacations, holidays, in-service training days. Again, we discussed previously, the key is in-service and training where the sales associate is actually working in their job, of course, but they are not in the field and therefore are not able to call on their customers. And a pharma company has to balance the amount of time the associates are in training versus making calls, because it's going to limit your sales effectiveness. And then lastly, as we discussed many times, training is extremely important for the sales associate. Call types. There is a presentation with detail where an associate promotes details one or more products to an HCP, and they may or may not leave literature about that product. There's a presentation with detail and a sample. The associate promotes details one or more products to an HCP. They may or may not leave literature about the product. They leave a sample of the product with the HCP, and the HCP needs to sign for that sample. Remember how important chain of custody is. Sample drop is no longer allowed. A sales associate cannot just walk up to a doctor, hand them samples, and leave. And a sales associate cannot give samples to a receptionist or other non-writer who does not have the legal authority to write a prescription for a controlled substance. Target customer counts. So here's where you get into, you want to understand how many targets should a sales associate have. So for mass market associates, after going through a lot of the math, it's usually a junior to mid-level associate, but you want to have less than 200 targeted customers for that specific healthcare provider. Call frequency and call length is pretty low for a mass market sales associate, so you want to reach as many as you can. The best thing to do with this, you're talking about 75 to 80% reach and a 2 to 3 frequency per cycle. So that's what you're going to be targeting for a mass market rep. That's around the industry standard. Now, a specialty associate is a senior level associate. They're going to have probably less than 80 targets, less than 80 customers, because their customers are highly specialized. The call frequency and call length is high. So you want to call on these doctors multiple times, more than a mass market rep would call on their customers. And the length of your call or your sales pitch is going to be longer as well. Since you have less customers, you want to have a higher reach, around 90% with these customers. And you want to call on them 4 or 5 times, more times, a higher frequency per cycle. Alignment by zip code and/or MSA. And here's a state example for the state of Florida. So an MSA and zip codes are data which will often be used to generate a detailed mapping of what your alignment looks like. In the example on the right side, each of those individual shapes are in territory, a sales associate's territory. So a single sales associate would call on the HCPs within that geographic area, that colored area. And this is what is referred to as the zip code to territory, or MSA to territory alignment. Now you can see we have highlighted here the West Palm Beach, Fort Pierce territory, which has 208 targets. Now, not all of your territories will have the same number of targets, but you want to have them close, within 15, 20% or less, because you want to make sure that each of your associates has enough customers to call on. You want to also make sure that if you have high writer customers, you want to make sure that you spread those out as well, because you don't want to have one sales associate be burdened with calling on so many high writing customers and have another associate with very, very few high writing customers. So you have to balance that out as well. And you go through an algorithm and examples, and you go through the whole process of going this targeting and alignment plan to understand how this works. In this case, we have all of the individual territories that are broken out in Florida, and this given example. Here's an example of an alignment by zip code or MSA for the entire country. So as you can see, I'm looking at right now the Wichita Hutchinson territory, and in this case we have 390 total doctors, HCPs, and the company decided to target only 99 of those. So all of these areas would be a territory for a sales associate to call on doctors, and this is based upon MSA mapping. So some companies do MSA, some companies do zip code to territory. It all depends upon how granular you want to get. Zip to ter allows you for mass market reps to have smaller territories because there's a lot more doctors you can reach that way. An MSA may be more popular for a specialty rep where you have less doctors to call on, less sales associates. Just want to go over this one example. This is a kind of tool that your IT department and your targeting and alignment group would use. So you want to basically draw out your map, go over, and you can use this to see how many targets versus how many total HCPs are in each of your territories. And things like this help you visually see what your territory alignments look like and also how many doctors there are. And in this case, the darker the color, the more doctors. So you can see how some have very few HCPs, the white or cream colored, and the dark orange have more. So you would look at something like this to get an idea of whether you have to balance out your field force better or whether it looks good overall from a national perspective. And you can do things like this at a national level, at a state level, various country levels too. If you're targeting and aligning for Canada or Mexico or somewhere else, same thing. And the last thing I wanted to discuss as far as like using visual tools and mapping to help you determine what to do and how to align is a non-contiguous territory. I did mention it before, but I wanted to show a visual example. Sometimes it's more cost effective and it makes more sense to split the territory. In this example, we have Atlanta Metro and Atlanta Lennox. And it just made more sense based upon the HCPs in this example to split the Atlanta Metro territory out. Now you may say, well, how does an associate call on this? So the associate may decide to call up in the Atlanta Metro North on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Atlanta Metro South on Thursday and Friday. It all depends upon their customer counts. And also if it's not a very far drive, they could actually hit both halves of their territory at the same time. But there really is no difference between Atlanta Lennox calling on somebody in the upper northwest and then having to go down to the southeast. That could be just as long of a drive. And that's why it's very important for an associate to go through pre-call planning on a Sunday, for example, before the week begins, so they can determine who they're going to call on what days, and they could be effective with not driving too far on any given day and hitting as many doctors as possible during that sales day. So when I teach this class on site, this is usually the time I get a lot of questions that pop up. So I didn't want to reorganize the lesson because I like the way the lesson flows, but I do want to go over some basics about what a zip to ter alignment actually looks like or actually means based upon looking at each individual HCP. So here we have an example of a bunch of healthcare providers that are in Florida and the zip codes listed over here. So when you go through a targeting and alignment process, you say, okay, we're going to align these zip codes to territory A, and we're going to align these zip codes to territory B. So all the healthcare providers who have a calling location is a private practice, a hospital, somewhere where the HCP practices medicine at a healthcare organization, a calling location. And we want to make sure that these zip codes for these calling locations are aligned to this territory, and the zip codes for these calling locations are assigned to this territory. So that's how things are broken out. Now in this example, I also wanted to point out that one doctor, Rajiv Brambry, has calling locations in different areas, as many HCPs do. But this doctor has a calling location in zip code 3931 and a calling location in 33180. Therefore, this doctor, this HCP, can be called on a sales associate both in territory A and territory B. So the territory A sales rep will call on this doctor at that location, Cocoa Beach, and the territory B sales rep will call on that doctor at the Ventura location. So that's how many times you'll have a HCP shared by multiple sales associates across territories because they have multiple calling locations. So we're about 20 to 25 minutes into this lesson now. I recommend that you go back and review what we've gone over so far because it's pretty complex material. and then we'll continue on with the next part of the targeting and alignment lesson. Methods to segment targeted customers. So not all targeted HCPs are equal. You basically start with a full universe of healthcare providers. You target specific HCPs based upon your targeting plan or goal, and then you segment the targets based upon prescribing history, patient counts, etc. So in the illustration below, in the chart below, you'll see we have a territory, Atlanta North. The full universe of healthcare providers is about 775. That means there are approximately 775 healthcare providers, writers, within this full universe. Of that, there's only about 200 targets that we're going to target for actually having the rep call on, because the rep is not going to call on the full universe. If the representative is, we'll use our same example as before, if the representative is promoting an irritable bowel syndrome drug for men and women, or just women over the age of 40, you're not going to call on veterinarians, psychiatrists, pediatricians. You wouldn't do that. So you take the full universe and you bring it down to a target. Now, after you target everyone, of those top 200, you have to go and segment those, go through a segmentation process, because you're going to have a really, really cream of the crop, your top tiered doctors in your segment area. So segmentation methods that we're going to discuss are deciles, tiers, early adopters, and super targets, and then we'll discuss some other methods as well. But what you're basically trying to do is start with a large universe and boil it down to your most important HCPs to call on, because it's the old 80-20 rule. So 20% of your doctors are going to write 80% of your prescriptions. So deciles. So you bucket your targeted healthcare providers into 10 buckets. Decile 1 is a small number of HCPs that account for about 20% of your sales, high brand loyalty, low growth potential, because they're already writing a lot of your product. Decile 2 through 5 is going to be a large number of HCPs that account for 40% of your sales, medium brand loyalty, but they have high growth potential because they're writing your competitors' products, and therefore, as a sales associate, you can make headway into there. As a pharma company, you can make headway and try to convince these HCPs to go ahead and write your product over a competitor. Decile 6 through 10 are your largest number of HCPs that account for 50% of your sales, but they have low brand loyalty and low growth potential. So reach and frequency goals will vary based upon the HCP decile. Decile 6 through 10 are the largest number of HCPs that account for 50% of sales, but they have low brand loyalty and low growth potential. So they're just as likely to write a prescription for your product as a competitor's. Reach and frequency goals are going to vary based upon the HCP decile, whether it be decile 1, 2 through 5, or 6 through 10. Decile 2 through 5 has the largest growth potential. So if your targeting plan calls for growing a brand, you're going to focus on 2 through 5. If your targeting plan calls on just sustaining what you currently have, where your product is going off patent, for example, and you just want to have as many scripts written on that product until it goes off patent and generic products come on, you may want to instruct your field forces to call on decile 1 targets more than others. Your reach and frequency goals will differ based upon the decile of the HCP. Here's an example of decile 1 through 5. You want to reach 90% of these doctors, and you probably want to call on them 5 times per quarter. The reason is you don't want to forget about these doctors. Even though they have high brand loyalty, you cannot take them for granted. Decile 6 through 8, the reach is going to be about 80%, and the frequency is 3 calls per quarter approximately. And then decile 9 and 10, your reach will be about 75%. Your goal reach will be 75%, and your frequency is going to be about 2 calls per quarter. These numbers are just a template or best practices based upon industry experience. This is normally where things fall, but of course they vary from pharma company to pharma company, and they vary from brand and or what your targeting plan, your targeting goals are supposed to be. Some industries instruct sales associates not to call on decile 1 targets very often. This is because of low growth potential. It's not that way in pharma. You cannot take for granted your top rating HCPs. They are inundated with calls from your competitors every day. And if you don't visit your top customers, they will cease to be your customer. Tiers. Tiers is a method to segment targeted HCPs into buckets based on perceived value. So tiering usually goes from tier 1 through 5, tier 1 being the most valued customers. NT represents HCPs that are non-tiered at all. So HCPs are usually given a tier value based on the potential growth. As was the case with deciles, you do not want to neglect those HCPs that are writing a lot of your scripts. An HCP that writes many prescriptions of your product may have a lower tier value than one who writes more than a competitor. So the idea here is to grow your business. So some pharma companies will say, you know what, this doctor is writing our product all the time. Let's make him a tier 5. He's important, but he's not as important because he's already writing our product. Let's give this other HCP who's writing a ton of our competitor's product, let's make him a tier 1 so we can focus more on him and try to flip him to write our product instead of a competitor. Early adopters. An early adopter is a healthcare provider that is willing to write a new brand immediately or shortly after it is approved. Based upon the data that's received by the IT department, you can see if a HCP has historically been an early adopter, meaning when a new product is launched, a new brand is launched, that doctor is quick to jump on board. So if you have a launch product, you may want to flag these HCPs as early adopters in your targeting and alignment solution, and therefore have associates call on them quicker or more often because they are early adopters. Early adopters do a lot of research regarding medications in clinical trials and like to be forerunners prescribing to their patients. Many HCPs are hesitant to write a new brand because of side effects that may have been missed during the approval process. It depends upon how educated your HCP is, how much homework they do on their own, how much research they do on their own. If you have a very proactive HCP who's always reading medical journals and understands what's in the pipeline of a lot of pharma companies, and they may be willing to write a prescription for a new brand as soon as it's available on the market. Early adopters tend to be more up to date on products and pharma company pipelines and are market leaders in prescribing them. Some think that early adopters are more aggressive or risky in their prescribing habits. This idea is often debated among sales associates. It's not a function of risky or more aggressive. It's just a function of more educated. These HCPs do their homework. Super targets. Super targets are targeted HCPs that you want to segment or flag from the others. This type of segmentation does not use an algorithm to decile or tier these HCPs. Super targets are usually flagged due to some intangible attributes, like if a sales associate has a relationship with the HCP, if the HCP speaks at company-sponsored events, you'll basically flag these doctors in your CRM, your customer relationship management solution, so you let your sales associate know, hey, this is a very, very influential writer. Super targets are often used as market influencers that help drive acceptance and use of the brand you're promoting. Just like there's market influencers in social media, you have healthcare providers that are market influencers. Basically, they go and they speak at events to other HCPs and help promote certain products based upon loyalty to the brand and also because the product works. You're not going to have a doctor speak highly of your product if your product is not working and helping patients. These are some of the super targets out there where they are your influencers and they are ambassadors who are promoting your brand. So we've gone over geography, how you align based upon your mapping. We've gone over all the types of segmentation. Just want to have a quick note about something that's always been a pet peeve. Deliverables to the field. As a targeting and alignment group and a commercial sales organization and an IT group, you send deliverables to field associates. So you're going to send out reports and dashboards and alerts to sales associates, district managers, regional directors, and one of the things you send out is a target list. What's incredibly annoying is when instead of sending out directionable or actionable information, associates and field personnel are sent data dumps. And here's an example right here. So you have Atlanta North, you have your HCPs, your doctors, and you have their ID numbers. And then this deliverable is sending out a tier, a decile, an early adopter flag, and a super target flag. Now, if I receive this as a sales associate, what am I supposed to do with this? This tells me nothing. There's nothing directional here. It's just a dump of data with every type of metric on there that's known by the targeting team. This is not directional. Am I supposed to call on tier 1 doctors? Am I supposed to call on decile ones? Am I supposed to call on early adopters? This is data overkill. And this is one of the problems with the targeting and alignment team often goes through, where they send out too much information to an associate and they don't specifically say, hey, focus on this metric to grow our brand. Targeting logistics. We talked about targeting and alignment, but how exactly does it work for field personnel and home office personnel from a logistics standpoint? Approximately 30 days prior to the end of the current incentive cycle, the targeting window opens. At this time, the targeting and alignment group will push out targets to the sales associates. Associates are usually allowed to make modifications to 5% or less of the targets. So the targeting window opens and the targeting and alignment team pushes out a list of targets to the sales associate. The sales associate then comes back and says, I don't like X number of targets for the following reasons. Number 1, they're deceased. Number 2, they moved out of my territory. Number 3, they retired from practicing. Number 4, they're legally restricted from writing prescriptions because they're sanctioned. Number 5, I can't see this doctor. He's hard to see. He's not around. He won't let sales associates in his office. And lastly, this HCP is inappropriate. They're a bad customer. It's an HR related issue. DMRL is usually known by the home office, but the no-see, hard-to-see and HR issues may not be known. That's why oftentimes a targeting and alignment team will allow a rep to make modifications to 5% of his or her target list by either dropping and or adding physicians. Once all the changes are finalized, the targeting window is now considered closed and the target list is frozen. You cannot make any changes during the incentive cycle once the list is frozen. The associates are usually incentivized based on their incentive universe, but some sales forces pay based on targeted HCPs only. The frozen target list incentive universe acts as an incentive baseline against which compensation will be paid. So your frozen target list as a sales associate is what you are going to be paid on, how well those customers on your target list do. During the cycle, some HCPs will have their DMRL status changed, deceased, moved, retired, legally status changed, but that is not taken into account and does not impact the target list. Sales associates can call on new HCPs that move into their territory, but they will usually not be compensated on those HCPs until they are added to their universe this subsequent cycle. We had a previous slide, we talked about the universe of doctors, we talked about the targeted doctors, and we talked about segments. Sales associates in most companies are paid upon their entire universe. So as long as that doctor is in your universe at the beginning of the incentive cycle, if he or she writes a prescription, that will count toward your incentives. If you're paid on targets only your target list will be used to determine your incentives and what you're paid on. And our next lesson, our upcoming lesson, is on incentives. We will go over all that. The last thing to discuss in this lesson is going to be the call plan. There are multiple brand teams within a pharma company. A brand team is the team of individuals responsible for promoting a specific product or brand and making sure it gets enough attention by the healthcare providers, the customers, and that the sales associates promote their product enough, for their brand enough. There's a limited number of sales associates to sell multiple brands, and each brand team wants their brand promoted to the most HCPs to get the most exposure. Products detailed in the first position are P1s, they get better results. So a P1 is talked about first. P2 and P3 are second and third position products, and it's difficult to keep the HCP's attention. It's kind of considered upselling. Do you want fries with that? Getting time in front of a doctor to promote a P1 product is hard enough. To go into a second and third product is extremely difficult, but it is done because you have a limited number of sales associates. For HCP specialty, do the HCP patients fall into the approved indication for your product? So an HCP can write off-label, but a sales associate cannot promote off-label. We've gone over this many times, but we're going to go over it again. The call plan needs to take into consideration off-label versus on-label. So here's an example of a call plan. This call plan has been sent down from the home office to the Atlanta North Territory. You have a list of your HCPs, their tier value, their specialty, and the products they're supposed to detail in the P1 and P2 positions. The two products you're promoting are Bestator and Gradalix. Bestator is a type 2 diabetes pill approved for patients over the age of 21. Gradalix is a topical eczema cream approved for patients over the age of 5. So let's look at your target list and your call plan. It looks like you have general practitioners, endocrinologists, the HCPs that practice internal medicine, and pediatricians on your target list, which is totally fine for the two products you're promoting. Now, for a general practitioner, endocrinologists, and internal medicine HCPs, they will see patients at a different range of ages. So therefore, you can promote Bestator and Gradalix to that HCP. And your company has told you, I want you to promote Bestator to Dr. Maselli and Dr. Dijon in the first position and Gradalix in the second position. For Dr. Vera, I want you to promote Gradalix in the first position and Bestator in the second position. Now, for your pediatricians, you have 1, 2, 3 of them. Gradalix is in the first position for all 3 pediatricians, but Bestator is not promoted at all. Why? Bestator is only approved for patients over the age of 21. So as a sales associate, it would be improper for you to go in to see Dr. Ponte and say, hey, Dr. Ponte, here's a type 2 diabetes pill that would be appropriate for your patients. Because Dr. Ponte is a pediatrician. Dr. Ponte doesn't have patients usually over the age of 21, so therefore it's inappropriate and also wrong for the sales associate to promote that product to that doctor. Now, this is the call plan pushed down to the sales associate. It is very, very important that the call plan stays on label and does not promote off label. An HCP can prescribe off label, but a sales associate cannot promote off label, and the call plan should not suggest that the sales associate promotes off label. This is the end of lesson 9. There will now be a 10-question quiz.